Before we engage with a messy situation or issue or phenomena of research using systems thinking, we need to look at how conventional thinking can be counterproductive in resolving these complex issues. So this video is about common traps in conventional thinking that hinders how we respond to complex messy situations in systems thinking research and practice. And to help you understand this, I'm using an excellent book chapter by Reynolds and Holwell which was published in 2010, called Introducing Systems Approaches, in their book, which they've edited. And the book is called Systems Approaches to Managing Change, a Practical Guide. Reynolds and Holwell explains how many aspects of our traditional thinking come from confusing what is a mess with a simple or even a complicated difficulty. So let's look at why this is the case. It is not unusual for us to approach the complex or messy situations that we encounter by adopting one or more of the listed positions on the slide. That is, we tend to ignore interconnections between factors, that we may assume a single case, that we may blame individuals, and that we may focus on outcomes, so only on what can be measured. So let's talk about each of these positions individually to show you and give you an idea about how you may confuse a messy situation with a simple or complicated one, which lead to inappropriate handling of the situation, issue, or phenomena that you are maybe researching. So let's talk about these. So first position is that we ignore interconnections. For example, let's look at the survival of animals and their extinction. So imagining, in our conventional way, we may imagine the survival of an animal who is going extinct in a way that has got nothing to do with our own lifestyle. So in this case, we ignore the big picture. For example, let's talk about the koala populations in, say, Australia, which have plummeted and reduced and went down drastically in recent years. And we may ignore the deforestation element of our livelihood and our action, which impacts how we enforce policies, whether in terms of, allocating protected areas, protected forests, or even prohibiting deforestation in the first place. Second position is that affects and lead to a traditional way of thinking about issues, is that we may assume a single case. So for example, we may target deaths from a stampede at a festival, from inadequate capacity of a street to hold festival goers, instead of there being multiple interrelated causations, like, for example, lack of training of staff, a lack of police presence during the festival. We may ignore the number of stalls. So many stalls that may lead to people, walking on each other. And also we may ignore the amount of people that were allowed to get into the festival and so on. Third, we may blame an individual or individuals. For example, migrants stealing jobs. Instead of attempting to understand the ways in which a situation arose that led to this problematic outcome, which in the case of migrants, could be, for example, companies hiring migrants for lower wages, which tend to attract migrants to certain countries. That's migrants wanting to earn more money because they don't have work opportunities in their own countries, because maybe of wars, because earnings by those migrants have higher value elsewhere. So, for example, they may send money to their families overseas. Or maybe it could be because countries are not willing to address their own poverty issues or the poverty issues of their own citizens, their destitution, to lift their own citizens. And they tend to ignore that, and they tend to depend on migrants, and so on, and many other reasons. So in this case, you could see why we could be only pigeonholing or only focus on migrants as stealing jobs and not thinking about the other interconnected issues. And fourth position is that we may focus on outcomes, and by that only on what can be measured. For example, we use number of properties built in a year to help solve the housing shortage crisis, which is, for example, right now happening in so many different countries, instead of the processes by which beneficial change might best occur. Like, for example, understanding why properties are empty in a certain countries, and how to allow occupation in these, how do we allow properties to be occupied? Also, to understand maybe the concentration of people in areas versus others, to understand the quality perhaps of homes provided, and to understand the reality of affordability for some people, and so on. So as Reynolds and Holwell brilliantly put it, we are blighted by a culture of targets, performance indicators, and best practice. This way of thinking tend to be, unfortunately, widespread, as they put it, in Western societies. So in the example of housing, by influencing the policy maybe and pushing for the building of more houses, that gives the impression that, yep, we will be solving the housing shortage crisis in a country, whereas in reality there are other issues at play that need to be equally targeted and solved by policy or other ways. So to sum up, you could see how non-systems thinking traps could lie. And these, Reynolds and Holwell say, could lie in two simple dimensions, if you want to sum up everything that I just said. One trap would be what they called reductionism. So the avoidance of the inevitable interconnections between variables or aspects in a situation. And the second is the trap of what they called dogmatism, which is using a single unquestionable perspective or viewpoint and working from that perspective alone to solve or deal with the situation. So hopefully this video gave you a very quick but interesting way of thinking about how some of the traps that we tend to see in conventional or traditional way of thinking when solving complex issues or situations or phenomena of research. And how and why this is very important, because it could lead to policy implications and so many other implications in society in so many ways around us.